The next couple types of first aid kits we're going to talk about are more of the tactical style, both trauma first aid kit and the individual first aid kit, or IFAK. Obviously the trauma kit, more designed for traumatic injuries, maybe gunshot wounds. IFAK, you can have it geared more towards tactical traumatic injuries, or you can have it just be a higher encompassing, more thorough, comprehensive kit, depending on what you would like to build. It's completely up to you. They are standalone. You can just carry them with you when you go to the range. You can put them in a backpack, but because of the MOLLE webbing on the back, you can also attach it to the back of a backpack or a chest rig. Backpack makes sense, especially if you're out of space on the inside of the backpack. You can attach it to the outside. It's easy to get to, and then detachable with that Velcro on the back. Otherwise, depending on how you have your chest rig set up, you may not have the opportunity to connect a trauma kit or a first aid kit, depending on what you have on the front or even on the side of your chest rig. Depending on how your gear is set up, you might have webbing on the side. Most likely you'll have some space on the back, but it's going to be hard for you to individually get to any of this MOLLE webbing or whatever you have attached to the back of your chest rig, unless you're expecting someone else to get to the components for you. For trauma kit, probably be a good idea to have a CPR mask. Doesn't need to be inside the kit. Attached to the outside of the bag would make it easy to get to. You can also have things like natural gloves and antiseptic wipes in here, in addition to just the CPR mask itself. Might be something good to include into, or at least on the outside of your trauma kit. Most important thing in a trauma kit is the tourniquet. So if you don't know how to use it, keep the instructions with you and watch a video on how to use it, but instructions are right here. So tourniquet, and then from there, some quick clot, probably a good idea for potential gunshot wounds, different sizes. If you have space, you can do things like the Israeli style emergency pressure bandage. Obviously take up a little bit of space. There are smaller versions of it. It'd be easier to fit this legitimate Israeli bandage pressure dressing in that bag if I wanted to. But I'd say the next important thing to have would be some gauze pads, gauze sponges. I have a bunch of these, and you need a way of connecting it, either by putting it underneath a pressure bandage or adhering it via like an ACE bandage like this, or with medical tape. You can put some pressure on it and hold the gauze down on the injury. You can also do things like petroleum dressing, not adherent petroleum dressings, a couple of those. Trauma pad, 5x9, probably be a good idea to have bigger size trauma pads for a trauma kit. Also just rolls of gauze. Couple hand sanitizer packets, but maybe have a larger section of just like personal protective equipment, whether that's antiseptic pads or antiseptic towels, and then some more gloves. ACE bandage obviously has multiple uses. You can use it to adhere and stick with pressure, either petroleum dressing, gauze pads, gauze roll, gauze sponge, trauma pad, even extra pressure onto an Israeli pressure bandage. And then they can also be used as a brace, maybe as a sling if you needed it. But the little tabs that hold pressure are not the easiest to use, and they don't stay on very well under movement. So for bandage purposes, you could potentially replace that or supplement that with a elastic bandage, self-adherent elastic bandage, where it doesn't stick to your hair or your skin or the injury itself, it just sticks to itself. If you have space, you can maybe have both. Otherwise, weigh the pros and cons and pick one or the other. With that, talking just a little bit more about specifics of this bag. Obviously, you can have it set up and sectioned off depending on what components you want where. You can also tighten this bungee, and if you wanted to leave the pack attached to your backpack or the back of your chest rig, you can set the bungee up so that unzipping the pouch will only drop the bottom half this much, or however much you want it to drop, or you can have it set up to where it opens completely if you want to lay it flat and get into everything as easily as possible. So with that, we'll clean up this and then start talking about the IFAK. For the IFAK, there's a lot to go through, so I'm going to sit down and talk about this one. It's the same basic layout. It's maybe a little bit bigger version of the trauma pack, just so it can fit more stuff in here, but the same MOLLE attachments with the quick Velcro release if you wanted it. You don't need a multi-tool as part of your IFAK, especially if you already have one elsewhere, but for me, it's an easy way to attach it with how little space I have left real estate-wise on MOLLE attachment points on my backpack. You can use this tactically, or you can use it just as a good, reliable first aid kit for longer backpacking trips. There's a lot of stuff in here you'll see. You can take advantage of the MOLLE that's on the outside of the pack itself. You've got things like these clothing shears, medical shears. Get some good quality pairs of those. This is just an easy way of attaching just a little clip light. It's obviously convenient if you're trying to find the components in the bag. It's easy to just take this carabiner off. It's out of the way and very hard to lose if you needed to get into the bag. There's also a handy little work flashlight in here, but you obviously have to get into the bag first. Everything kind of just falls out because of how stuffed full it is. We'll just start from the top and work our way down. So the flashlight we talked about. There's a couple different modes on this. There's the bigger surface area version. It has a hook and a magnet in case you wanted to connect it to something instead of just having to hold it, and then it does have a smaller work light portion right there on the front. So if you have space, that can be handy. Sunscreen, so if you're outside for long periods of time with less covering of your skin, you're just potentially risking sunburn. It's a good thing to have, and it's just kind of an emergency kit. Ace bandage, talked about that in the trauma kit. It's a good idea for sprains, strains. Also use it as a pressure dressing for if you have gauze underneath. If you have an allergic reaction, you can have some Benadryl. Probably be a good thing to have, especially if you're supplying a larger group. Small thing of hydrogen peroxide for wound cleaning, or for like a dog first aid kit. That's a way of inducing vomiting if you needed to. A clean pair of tweezers. This is just a thicker version of moleskin. There's moleskin elsewhere in this kit. Pre-cut blister dressing. It's just kind of thin, and then there's like mole foam padding, extra softs. If that's not good enough, then that's a way to supplement that. These small little Advil containers are handy. You don't necessarily have to use Advil. You can also, they're not ever full, so you can add ibuprofen, whatever your painkiller of choice is, or you can just fill much more than just 10 tablets of various types of painkillers or other medication there if you needed to. Got a couple of safety pins just up here out of the way. A couple different sizes if you needed it for different things. And cleansing wipes and just an assortment of all sorts of different size band-aids. Easy to get to in here. Get even more band-aids, all sorts of different styles and types and sizes. I have another section with some gauze. There's some gauze mixed in here, but there's much more selection of gauze elsewhere in this kit. A much bigger container of hand sanitizer. Needed that. And then a pre-shaped ankle bandage or ankle brace, kind of like Ace bandage. You just don't have to shape it yourself like you do with an Ace roll. Some medical examination gloves, nitrile gloves. This is pretty big selection of gauze pads, all sorts of different brands and sizes. Gauze pads. You could, in an emergency situation, use super glue as wound closure. Don't recommend it necessarily, but easy way to not lose the cap, and the bottle itself is putting it in a Ziploc bag. Also Neosporin or just triple antibiotic ointment for like open wounds to prevent infection. Anti-itch cream, there's all sorts of different brands. This is just an easy like sample kit that was easy to stick in this little Ziploc bag. This dental medic kit, I've used it before for things like temporary fillings and dental wax temporary filling and temporary cavity filling mixtures. Other than that, it's just first aid instructions and some really basic stuff like dental floss and toothpicks. Other thing, so another thing I just realized was missing from that trauma kit is the chest seals. Basically, so it does have instructions on the front, but it's for a sucking chest wound. If you get a gunshot injury to the chest, potentially an entry and exit wound, you need to seal that so that your lungs don't deflate. So it's got a one-way valve on here. Usually they'll come in a kit like this. We've got one for the entry and one for the exit with the instructions. Definitely need to supplement this to the trauma kit, and it's a good idea to have it in a first aid kit too. Also just the same kind of stuff that we've been covering before with the ABD pads and the gauze sponges, gauze pads. So that's it for that portion, and then going in here it's a lot of the smaller stuff in this little mesh pocket. So waterproof adhesive tape, some petroleum jelly, got some various tips of different sizes for the syringes. If you're going to have a syringe, have clean water or saline solution. That's where having stuff like this emergency lifeboat rations where you're sure this water is clean. If you can keep that with you, either added to the first aid kit itself or in a separate pouch where you can keep it from getting punctured, that would be a good idea. Otherwise, the syringes are pretty useless if you don't have access to clean water or saline solution. And then some small medication stuff in here. So Imodium for anti-diarrhea, triple antibiotic if the Neosporin wasn't enough. Some different brands, different styles of allergy relief, hydrocortisone, small little packet of that, Motrin, and there's some duplicates of that kind of stuff. We also have a small little selection of sinus relief medication and day and night cold medication. Probably a good idea to label that so that you're not confused at what the medications that you're packing are for if it's been a while since you've made your kit. Rubber band, it's in there for just keeping things together or potentially adhering bandages to body parts. We also have a small selection of suture kits of different styles and sizes. If you know what you're doing with those, good idea to have them with you. And then more of the really small bandages for like finger injuries and small cuts and scrapes. And then lastly, it's another quick clotting sponge. So with that, you can tell it's obviously a lot more components of all sorts of different styles that are much more than what you'd find in a typical first aid kit. Even the more specialized first aid kits like we talked about yesterday, there's no way that this can carry as much as one of these can. And they're not designed to, but it's a good way of starting if you were to buy a kit like we talked about yesterday. Obviously have some of the components, and then you can go and individually buy everything else as you see fit. Some other things to maybe include in your kit that I maybe don't have in mind are things like ammonia inhalants. Obviously the box will take a lot more space than just the individual capsules. There's 10 capsules in this box specifically. So if you're just using a smaller dose, a smaller portion or smaller quantity, then those will store much more easily than an entire box will. If you want a larger selection or just more small packs of hydrocortisone anti-itch cream, it's maybe something else that you can add. For a small first aid kit like this, you're not going to have space for one of these large poison oak and poison ivy cleanser bottles. but they do sell it in these little quick single-use packets, which can for sure be a lifesaver. It's a different style than just hydrocortisone. These eye wash and iPad kits are definitely a necessity if you don't have it elsewhere in your kit. The box takes up a lot of space, but if you were to remove the components and store them elsewhere, it's a good way of saving space as opposed to just packing the entire box. It comes with things like oval iPads, adhesive strips to stick them onto your eye, over your eye, and then the actual eye wash solution itself. The bigger kits, which are difficult to ever get squeezed into a smaller first aid kit like this, will have a bigger solution, a bigger bottle of the eye wash solution, and then also like an eye cup, make it easier to rinse your eye out. But for small, carryable, inconvenient first aid kits, you could argue this would be enough. And then if your moleskin and mole foam is not enough, you can also look into things like this. It's a hydrocolloid gel blister cushion, so it's kind of like moleskin, just a little bit fancier version, but it obviously takes up a little more space unless you take them out. There's 5 of them in there. If you take them out of this hard case, then it might be easier to pack them.